Tonight, we're unsure if we're reaching you because communications appear to be down, and that usually means only one thing: invasion. If we are reaching you, we'll have more details in the hour.
And seen our fleet systems. Want to remind you that they still exist. A paid advertisement at 11.
Welcome back, you alien scum, to another episode of Hoth Topics, a Star Wars podcast.
I've heard of them.
That's us. That's you and me.
Exciting.
Who are we? We are a desert-dwelling, old, crazy hermit, Ian, and a recruit at the Imperial Flight Academy, John. Welcome back, John.
Hi, Ian. Good to be back in my apartment.
In your apartment. What I want to talk about right now kind of came about earlier today, and I was listening to fellow podcasters, Tatooine Sons. If you're not familiar with Tatooine Sons, they are a podcast where father and his two sons talk about Star Wars and share their love for the franchise, and you get a really cool multi-generational perspective. I think you've listened to one or two of their episodes, correct?
This is true. I haven't listened to all that many. I would say I've listened to half of one. No ill will towards them, just that I wasn't in the right place to listen to it. And I do like the concept of the show with the multi-generational take on Star Wars. I never got around to listening to it. I have a post on our website, hothtopics.com. Excuse me, hothtopicspodcast.com, explaining why I can't listen to podcasts while I'm doing a podcast, because I don't want to inadvertently steal material.
Well, you might be...
I have some issues.
That is a very good... and that's a fair thing to worry about, because we don't want to accidentally, start taking other people's stuff and just regurgitating it here. However, something came up on their podcast that...
That's legitimately what we're doing tonight.
Well, it's not what we're doing. No. It's a completely different... It's just one thing that they said had me spiraling down this rabbit hole of thought, or Sarlacc pit of thought, if you will, that just kind of exploded into a whole thing. They have a section on their podcast where they kind of just ask questions that either they've taken from the community or come up with themselves, and they just kind of discuss those questions. And it's a really cool podcast, and I recommend you check it out if you haven't. One particular question that caught my eye, or ear rather, in the last episode was, is Saw Gerrera a bad guy? They talked about it and they discussed it, and I'm sure we can discuss it today as well. But the thing that I really wanted, that kind of triggered this thought process for me, was that question. And I started going down this line of thought that was all about Star Wars. Originally, when it originally came out, was about the good versus evil, hero's journey, kind of. There's black and there's white, very little gray area in the middle there. You know who the good guys were, you know who the bad guys were, and it sort of taught that lesson. And as we've kind of continued our Star Wars journey and things have developed with the times, we've seen that lesson sort of evolve, I think, to kind of reflect some of the modern strifes that we've been dealing with in our era, the current era that we're in, so that those questions, I think, have evolved with the times to be less about, okay, there's a lesson about black and white, but we've also started including in Star Wars lessons of the gray area. There are bad guys who sometimes do good things for good or bad reasons, and there are good guys that sometimes do bad things for good or bad reasons. And so what that whole sort of line of inquiry brought me to, what are the lessons that you and I have learned from Star Wars? How have they evolved and changed with the franchise? And what do we think that a younger generation can or will get out of the lessons presented in Star Wars? Now, I am a bit of a film aficionado, by no means a professional of any kind, trying to get there. And John, you have
I've seen movies.
You've seen movies, and you're also a history enthusiast and a bit of a military history enthusiast as well. So I was thinking maybe we can kind of use those sort of viewpoints and our growing up with Star Wars to kind of talk about this subject. What do you think?
Could be interesting. See where it goes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So of the things that I want to point out right off the bat is that no matter what you're watching, what you're absorbing in popular culture, there's always going to be an underlying message behind it. That's just how art works. Like, my intention here is not to go super, like, I don't want to go political in any direction. What I want to point out is that there are messages in every art form that the artists put in that art form. Even if, that message is there is no message, that's still a message, and that's getting pretty meta and doesn't really apply to Star Wars. There's always going to be an underlying message. And that message is almost always affected by what the time period is that the film was made in, or the media was made in. We'll use film since this is, kind of a film and TV discussion. So a great example would be during the Great Depression, theaters started pumping out escapism fantasy films with these messages of hope and triumph that were used as an escape for the people living in that harsh time, to kind of get over what was happening in their reality, which was this economic collapse. That's why we have The Wizard of Oz. That's why The Wizard of Oz exists today. It was a film that was made to provide an escape for this audience at this time. And if we go farther into the future, you look at any decade and you'll see trends that kind of connect to the time period at hand and what society's messages are to people. So I guess the reason I'm pointing that out is that Star Wars has those. Star Wars is certainly influenced by the time period that it's made. The prequels have slightly different messages than the originals. The sequels have slightly different messages than the prequels, and so on and so forth. So what kind of does anything pop out at you in terms of kind of what the difference is in some of the messages that and some of the lessons that we think are being taught in Star Wars at this time?
Well, the original trilogy, or the post prequels, as I like to call them, so dumb. Because everything is prequel or the sequel, so it's the post prequel or the pre sequel. Like, the enemy in that was a tyrannical government that was controlling everything with this iron grip that needed to be resisted. Something very familiar to any American citizen growing up and reading about the beginning of our own revolution against England. I don't think the Rebel Alliance had any taxation problems, but it was kind of a similar thing of overthrowing what they believed to be a tyrannical system. The prequels, if we just look at the Republic as it stands by itself, not so much with the story of Anakin on Tatooine and stuff, it doesn't really apply to the discussion. We didn't have that tyrannical government in this one, but we did have the political intrigue of a failing government, one that was so wrapped up in its own bureaucracy that it couldn't see what was happening.
Right.
I lost my train of thought on that one, because I started to think, I don't think this is what Ian asked me.
It's okay. We're spitballing and it's late, so
yeah.
We're having a philosophical discussion at midnight on a Monday, though technically Tuesday now.
Nailed it.
Well, let me see if I can pick up what you were putting down there. I liked how you mentioned the Revolutionary War aspect about the original trilogy. I think a lot of times people automatically go to World War II because of the Nazi overtones that we see in the Empire's kind of like structure.
Right.
I think that's something that if we look at the Republic in the prequels, it kind of is, in my opinion, making commentary on, well, we saw, fantasy Nazi Germany in its full Nazi-ness. How did it get there? I think it was kind of a lesson that doesn't necessarily get told a lot in American history class, where we're taught about World War II when we went into World War II. The Nazi Germany was being bad and bullying a bunch of people, and we came in as the heroes. But we don't tend to focus a lot on how it got there. And I think that was kind of the message, one of the messages that the prequels was trying to tell us, is that, hey, if you get wrapped up in the bureaucracy of things and you don't pay attention to who's controlling the systems, and you're not active in recognizing that, you too can end up in a weird empire situation.
I think that's what I said.
Yeah, you kind of
you're feeding off what I did.
You kind of slowed your train there, so I was trying to reconnect the tracks. Not an actual train.
Not a real train.
No,
obviously.
Well, then where do the sequels come in on that? Episodes 7 and 8, kind of in that thought process. Do you think?
That's a good question. Because we don't really see what's going on with the Republic, because
it blowed up.
They're not so much. We have the First Order coming in, and I don't think it's established that they've taken over. They're just another extremist group like the Resistance that just happens to have the power to take the galaxy. Force Awakens, they've come out of hiding, basically. But they're finally like showing their cards,
right?
One could say, to the galaxy. And The Last Jedi, I think the timeline is only like a few hours, so we don't really know what the extent of the First Order's control is. Because if that movie takes place 10 minutes after The Force Awakens, that means that it was only a couple hours that the government was, like, the ruling government was destroyed.
Right.
So we really don't know what, like, it's literally chaos at the moment. We have one group that is able, like, probably has the facilities to take control of the galaxy, and a group of around 20 people on a Corellian junk ship. Piece of junk.
It's just a piece of junk.
I really don't know where that will fit in there. Like, I don't want to just say they're just rehashing the whole, like, the bad guys are the space Nazis thing, but I mean, that's what they're doing. And I think they're just using that comparison to try to make it stand on its own.
Sure. Here's the way I look at it. If the original trilogy was, we can be the heroes and stand up to wrong when we see wrong, the prequels were, this is how evil begins. I think that the sequel trilogy so far is, if you don't pay attention, if you don't take threats seriously, they can come out of nowhere. That's kind of your Force Awakens lesson. I think the Last Jedi lesson, at least on this political analogy spree that we're going on, is even if you've been defeated, you can't lose that hope and that fire, and you have to come back and keep fighting what's right. Like, it's showing where the original trilogy was showing us kind of like right in the middle of being the heroes, you know, fighting the good the Empire. Last Jedi, and also the Rebels TV series too, is showing us you can build from nothing into a force that will right the wrongs. You know what I'm saying? That's some pretty heavy political talk, which oddly I think is something that George Lucas would have enjoyed hearing us talk about, considering how heavy kind of the politics features in a lot of Star Wars. I think that's something that people kind of overlook and take for granted, and I really didn't show much interest in it until I was older. I don't know, what about you?
Well, I've been rewatching the Clone Wars while I was doing my Comic-Con stuff. A lot of the episodes that had that political intrigue were, to me, were a lot more interesting presented in a TV show that could take its time to tell that story, as opposed to in the prequels where they didn't really have the time to tell those, to say what was going on really and to really focus on it, because they had to tell Anakin's story, they had to tell the clone story, they had to tell Obi-Wan's story. At least in the Clone Wars and in Rebels, being able to see those political aspects of Star Wars being able to be fleshed out was kind of cool, and kind of like, I wish the prequels were longer or had been presented as a television series. I think they would have been accepted a lot more if we were able to take the time to really understand what was going on and not just kind of have to be pushed through these major events that only got, a handful of minutes of screen time because we needed to see clones shooting things.
Right.
Not that I dislike clones shooting things.
I in fact, watching clones shoot things is going to be a bit of a pastime for me. I am going to go back and rewatch all the episodes. You got a head start on me there with the Comic-Con stuff.
Yeah, I just finished Star Trek Voyager, so I needed something else to stream.
Hey, there you go. Well, now you're going to be all caught up. Any last, I think we'll move on a little bit from the political lesson bit. Any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just interested to see what Episode 9 is going to bring to that table. I know we've heard tons of rumors about when the next one will take place, if there's going to be a time jump, if it's going to be take place in a galaxy ruled by the First Order and Supreme Leader Ren. So that will be interesting to see how the galaxy is going to deal with, or even accept, First Order rule. It really seemed with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that even though the rebels fought to bring the Republic back, when the Republic was back, it did the exact same thing that it did before and just stagnated and fell to its own corruption. Which is, its own interesting story that, these governments these idealized governments continue to fail.
Well, yeah, and it's the good guys fail just as much as the bad guys do in Star Wars, and we see that in I think during our Jedi discussion back when we had Kai on, I kept talking about the circular nature of the rise and fall of the Jedi, and you can certainly look at the rise and fall of galactic governments in a similar light. There's always a rise in the idea, and then the idea, people get behind it, and then it achieves its peak potential, and then they just get overloaded with all of the bad things that come with running a government, and they kind of implode.
Well, I think the issue with what the Republic came is very similar really to expectations of the new Disney Star Wars film. What do they call it? The Alliance to Restore the Rebellion, or the Rebel Alliance, as it was called. I think they saw the old Republic and as an idealized version. They restored the Republic, and it was just business as usual with a new name for most people. I mean, we see in the Clone Wars cartoons that the Trade Federation still has a seat in the Senate, and they're openly working with the Separatists, but at the same time saying, no, we don't, and continuing to use the corruption of the Republic against the Republic, or to benefit themselves. And I'm sure there's going to be some stories and books that come out that show the same thing happened with the New Republic.
But I don't think the New Republic was around long enough for...
Well, it's 30 years.
Yeah,
well,
30 years on a galactic scale? Like, I'm not sure...
the Empire was around.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point. Okay.
Well, my original point was that it's with the fans and the expectations of the Rebel Alliances. I think a lot of the hate of the new movies is these high expectations that we as fans and fans of this franchise for 40 years were hoping for. For me personally, I recognize that no matter how high my expectations were, they were never going to reach that. So all the movies I go in with very low expectations. Not that it's going to be a bad story or that it's going to be bad writing or bad cinematography or anything like that. Just, it's not going to be what I wanted Star Wars to be as a kid or even as a young adult growing up. I'm not going to get the Thrawn that I remember, picking up the Heir to the Empire novels at the library the moment that they were put on the shelf after I returned them. Even though I never read them, I picked them up and stare at the covers and just, play with my action figures and pretend that I knew what was going on. I knew those things weren't going to happen. I wasn't going to have this. It wasn't going to have the same effect because they were new stories, and I think a lot of people, like the Rebel Alliance, just thought way too high of what was going to happen when the new system was put into place,
right,
and were disappointed. I haven't read any of the new novels that are based in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, because in all honesty, those stories don't interest me.
You're a galactic
I'm the
Civil War
the
era
galactic
guy.
The galactic Civil War era is the era of Star Wars I like the most.
But see, that's the thing I really respect about how you look at these things, is like you've acknowledged the fact that the stories aren't going to be what you expect from your childhood memories, but you still enjoy the universe, enjoy what comes out, and you still love what came before. You don't dismiss it just because something new came out that you didn't like.
See, like when the prequels came out, I never understood that. Like, well, I could see the hate for them, and like I could understand where it's coming from, but I never hated them myself.
Right.
Hell, I love the Endor movies were the first movies of Star Wars I rented. So, already starting off with low.
Yeah,
anything
Ewok
beyond that
movies
is pretty good. And again with the new movies, I'm not expecting much from the prequels, with the new Disney characters.
The sequels, yeah.
But at the same time, I don't hate them.
Right.
I personally loved what they did with Luke in The Last Jedi, but I've come to recognize that I'm a troll. But I love this idea that he looked back at the Jedi Order and said, these guys were just as corrupt as anything else. They just didn't realize it, and me bringing that back is just going to ask for trouble. I loved that. And
yeah.
The fact that people seem to forget, that hate the movie, that in the end, it seems at least that he realized there was an error in that thinking and came back.
Well, and I think that's an important lesson that we learn in all Star Wars, is that despair is the worst thing you can do to yourself in harsh times. And that's one of the things that really resonated with me, because as you know, I really got back into Star Wars. I was always a Star Wars kid, and I always loved it and enjoyed it growing up. But I wrote that article on that opinion piece where I talked about how I kind of became jaded and kind of a toxic fan after I was kind of influenced by the negative opinions about the series, and how that was wrong of me to become that. But I really got back into the series when I first moved here, and my mom got sick. My mom is a brain cancer survivor she had a stage 4 glioblastoma, which is like hardcore. Not a lot of people come back from that cancer. And in my kind of like haze, because the whole family I think was going through this haze when that was going on, just trying to get her better and get through the treatments and everything. And she's fine now. She's doing great. She's like 7 years cancer free. It's fantastic and awesome and amazing. But in this haze, I just was like turning to all my old escapes, all my old entertainments to try to just find something to help through it. And Star Wars was the one thing, going back and watching those movies and getting back into the fandom, like that was the lesson that I learned the most from. Weird, considering, I was in my 20s when I learned that lesson from Star Wars, but it was, despair is the worst thing you can do to yourself in those crisis times, and that even if your government's collapsed, and the Jedi are just as corrupt as everybody else, or the Confederacy didn't turn out to be what you thought it was, or the New Republic was just as bad as the Old Republic with all its problems. Like, you can always move on from that. You can always fight to make it better, even if it doesn't work out. And you can persevere and push through that and come out the other side, and just knowing, like, yeah, you know what? Instead of wallowing in the mistakes of the past, I'm going to learn from those. I'm going to move on and become stronger. And I think that was a huge lesson that people overlook in The Last Jedi, especially with Luke's arc. Mm-hmm. But that was I think that was the lesson that resonated most for me in all of these films. How about you? Was there any particular lesson or kind of wisdom within Star Wars that really hit home for you at any point in your life?
To be perfectly honest, I can't really think of any. There may be something there, and it's just something it's like that I just do that I don't realize.
Right, it's Star Wars. It's ingrained.
Because I mean, like, we're sitting in my dining room, and I can look around and spot 30-something Star Wars related items just around my apartment. So, like, I think my lesson I learned was I'm a sucker for advertising. I like toys. I like shiny things. I think I have spent too many years being a vocal supporter of the Empire to troll people, and that the lessons, like life lessons I learned from Star Wars is more of oh man, I don't really know how to put it, but like the interactions with other people through Star Wars, where we can make jokes at each other, but at the end still like appreciate each other's point of view on different things.
Well, I think that's a pretty good lesson there. Like it's more of a meta one, but it's it's like you can like a thing and dislike a thing and give your friends crap and poke and prod each other, but at the end of the day, all still like revel in those differences because you all like the same thing.
And I think that's a good lesson for more people need now more than ever. Is that it really feels like that in all things there's an us versus them mentality.
Yeah, it's really become that.
I know you're saying that like in the early films there is no gray, but right. For a fandom there should be.
Yes,
you should be able to go, the movie was meh, or I don't like that movie, and then your friends go, I like that movie, let's go get a beer, something like that. And
yeah,
at least in the last couple of years since the Disney acquisition, it's really felt like you either hated this movie and you're a good person, or you love this movie and you're a good person. And if you're anything else than my opinion, you're a terrible person. Right. And you don't deserve your own opinion. And that is dumb. That's so dumb to me.
And honestly, even though I'm a troll.
That's dumb.
Well, like, I know you. And so I know when you are trolling. And God, not the audience knows by now, because I know when you're trolling and when you're serious, and I don't think enough people, including myself in other aspects of my life, not necessarily Star Wars, but I find it's a struggle to sometimes not take things seriously. Mm-hmm. And it's something that like we all really need to chill and be like, look, like or hate something, it's not worth getting this serious about it.
Well, a good example of that in fandom is the friend I went to Comic-Con with, who I did the Star Tours costume with. She is not a fan of The Last Jedi. And she was a fan of The Force Awakens. She loved Rey. We did a Sith Rey costume for her a couple years back.
And it was rad.
And when The Last Jedi came out, she kind of lost faith in Star Wars, at least in the new Star Wars. We've talked about it a few times. I can see the point of her issues with the franchise, but at the end of the day, her and I are still friends, and her and I did a Star Tours costume thing together because she's still a fan of Star Wars.
Right.
She just isn't sure how to think of where it's going, and
right.
we really won't know where the new movies are going until 9 happens.
Right. Right. And, I think that's a good lesson, too, is that no matter what you think of one piece of Star Wars, like, for example, I hate the time travel. I don't like it. But it's one piece of Star Wars.
Ian is, of course, talking about the time travel in Star Wars Rebels, where Ezra travels to the world between worlds, where there are many portals to different places in time and space. And he saves Ahsoka.
Bleh. And I maintain my bleh about that particular part of Star Wars, but it's not gonna crush my love of the franchise. It's not like The Last Jedi didn't crush Catherine's love of the entire franchise.
No, she's still a big Mando fan.
Yeah, so it's there's room for that in the fandom. Now, the podcast that kind of brought this rabbit hole about was Tatooine Sons, and like I mentioned before, it's a multi-generational perspective, which I think is really important with Star Wars, and it's not something that we look at a lot. And I think it's just as important as multi-generational perspective is just as important as any other diverse perspective on the franchise and in anything in our lives. So if you could pick something from Star Wars, a lesson or a state of mind or something that you think is really important for us to give to the next generation of fans through the medium of Star Wars, what do you think would be a good thing to pass on, or what do you think is a good thing that we've seen being passed on in the current media?
For Star Wars, to me, Star Wars has always been a pulp series. So the Flash Gordon, the kind of things that the original or the post sequels were. I love saying that. Were based on these high adventure swashbuckling tales.
Right.
And what I think is the most important thing about Star Wars is to pass on that anyone can be a hero. I think, of course, in Star Wars right now, at least in the last 3 trilogies, it's been anybody who's also a magical wizard can save the galaxy. But
they had a lot of help from non-wizards.
Right, and that's what I'm excited about the anthology films, is that we'll get to see. It won't be Force users saving the galaxy. It will be anybody and everyone, which I think is a very important thing to tell kids, that it doesn't matter where you're from or who you are or what you look like, that you can make a difference.
I think that's something we talked about too when we were giving our Last Jedi discussion episodes. That's one of the reasons that I personally really like that Rey isn't a Skywalker. Mm-hmm. She isn't a Kenobi. She is somebody who came from one of any bajillion of backgrounds a person can come from, and she still could be the hope and the hero.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I agree with you. I think that's a really important lesson, and I think we're seeing that more and more with the Disney acquisition. Honestly, Rebels had that really strong. You can come from anywhere and still.
As long as you have Force powers.
No, it's not just. But think about it. It's not just Ezra and Kanan who were the heroes. Ezra and Kanan were part of a team. They were part of the Ghost crew, and Hera and Sabine and Zeb, and even Chopper all played a part in shaping. In being heroes. They were heroes as a team. Yeah. No. I think that is. I agree with you. I think that's probably the best lesson that we can pass on to the next generation of Star Wars fans, is that anybody can be a hero, anybody can be a part of the heroic solution, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird thought, because we get so many complaints that Rey is a Mary Sue, or like these different female characters that have popped up in Star Wars as heroes can't do anything wrong, they always get everything right and whatever. But Star Wars is perfect for that.
Yeah.
Because
Star Wars is that.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I don't need my Star Wars to be the Dark Knight. I hate the Dark Knight. And I don't hate the Dark Knight. I just hate what it did to cinema. Everything had to be dark and gritty and realistic. And we don't need that.
Yeah,
we just watched the Shazam trailer, and DC is finally embracing its ridiculousness of comic books.
True,
and
but
if DC had done that earlier, they would have made a better franchise.
They also are releasing a Teen Titans show, and where one of the lines is "F Batman." So
yeah, but
dark and gritty.
It's EW. Don't worry about it. Or CW.
CW. Yeah, fair enough.
That's their whole thing. It's all their shows.
Teen angst.
Yeah, 100%. And
there's a place for that.
If you're gonna do that, that better be the right Robin. There's one Robin that works for it. It's Damian Wayne. It doesn't work for any of the other Robins very well.
I would argue Jason Todd.
Nathan Drake. Nathan Drake?
Nathan Drake? Of Uncharted fame?
Ian, I'm absolutely agreeing with you on who you said. I said Nathan Drake.
You were thinking of Tim Drake.
Yes, and that's not who I meant.
No, you meant Jason Todd. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Nathan Drake for the next Robin.
Welcome to Hot Topics, a DC Universe podcast. Ian, real quick, because you are the Batman person and I am the potato one, which is ironic because you're from Idaho.
Right.
Jason Todd is the one that was killed by Joker?
Correct. He was the one that fans voted to
be killed?
To be killed, and then he came back as Red Hood.
Hood. Which one was Nightwing?
That was Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson became Nightwing.
So he's the first Robin.
Yeah, right? Dick Grayson, first Robin, became Nightwing, and then it was Tim Drake, I think. Then it was Jason Todd who got
he got
stuff.
Jokered.
He got Jokered. And then it was Tim Drake who became Red Robin, and then it was Damian Wayne.
The burger place?
Yeah, he became a burger joint.
Alright.
Which, you fight crime with food and tastiness.
And he gets hungry.
Yeah.
And then Damian Wayne's at the end somewhere.
Yes, true.
And then, Batman Beyond.
Oh, yeah. Dude, Batman Beyond was awesome.
What's that guy's name? It's something futuristic.
All I can hear in my head is the theme song for Batman Beyond now.
Well, now all I can hear is X-Men.
That was the thing. We were sitting with our friends at Comic-Con when we met up. It was like 5 of us, and we're all sitting there, and we're talking about Star Wars, and like randomly, just like it did now, the conversation segued into other pop culture, and then somebody just like mumbled the first bar to the X-Men theme, and it's just this table in the middle of a Marriott pool area, just all of us randomly going
yeah, but no energy.
Energy.
The most like apathetic to the theme song you have ever heard. Whatever.
But it was all 5 of us.
Yeah.
It was that's what it was. I forgot about that, which is dumb because it happened 2 days ago. Good times.
What were we talking about?
Star Wars.
Damian Wayne. He's got father issues.
He does. You know who else has father issues?
Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, probably.
Barbara Gordon.
Yes.
And walking issues.
Oh, that's not okay. But back to Star Wars. Yeah. Well, this was Ra's al Ghul. This was a much more profound, I suppose. I mean, I think it was profound, but it's also almost 1 a.m. So if this could come out and everybody's like, Ian, what are you talking about? But
my alarm says it'll go off in 4.5 hours, so I can get to work.
Ooh.
And edit the previous episode.
Yeah. Also,
I'll probably edit. No, I won't edit this one tomorrow.
Nah. I mean, I don't know how
time works.
Time works.
Time is a construct.
I don't wear a watch.
If any of you have out there were like, why would I ever want to see the movie Tag? Go rent it.
Go rent it. It's worth a rent at the very least.
It's up there with Dodgeball and like just ridiculous. Why was this made? What a dumb concept. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie.
Right.
Sort of thing. Also, Hawkeye broke both of his legs on the first day of shooting, and he's a pretty rad guy.
Yeah.
Red guy. Doesn't afraid of anything.
So, one other lesson I've kind of learned from the experience of The Last Jedi and Solo, I think is one that you have already learned, which is, you talked about keeping your expectations kind of realistic for these films. I don't want to say low because I don't think that really implies. I think that it gives the wrong connotation to what you're trying to say. But like keeping your expectations realistic, and one lesson that I've learned is to take speculation with a grain of salt. Like I've actually kind of stopped. I'll skip over parts in some of the podcasts that I listen to, which I love these podcasts, but I'll skip over some of the parts where people are really doing heavy speculation into what's going to happen in episode 9 or what's going to happen in the last season of Rebels that's coming out, or Clone Wars that's coming out. And I've kind of stayed away from that because I think that was one of the things that kind of added fuel to the recent fire we saw, which was people overhyped their own expectations, like you were saying before, and they overhyped their own theories. And when those theories didn't become true, it just kind of added unnecessary angst to the pot. I've really taken a step back, and I don't get me wrong, I love to speculate on story stuff, but I've really reeled that in and kind of taken a step back from that portion of the fandom, because I don't want to make an assumption about something, have it not come true, and then be upset about that. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So that's a meta lesson I took away from the whole thing. Going back to the next generation of Star Wars fans too, like, honestly, the thing that's most important to me is that these kids, and they're kids, they are kids, they get to see Star Wars the way I saw it when I watched The Phantom Menace in theaters, when I watched the originals on VHS for the first time, when I saw the prequels on the big screen. I want them to have that experience of awe and excitement, the childlike wonder that I think, even though we're still fans of this great series and we would like to think we still retain some of that, like, we need to let them experience that. With the internet being what it is right now and the ability to say whatever we want, I think it's our responsibility to keep that kind of the older speculation and arguments, kind of the stuff that we deal with as in the fandom, both positively and negatively, kind of keep that separate from the kids and just let them have their Star Wars. Even if it's not what we expected, to them it's going to be their introduction to this world, and we owe it to them to let them experience Star Wars the same way we did when we were kids.
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing for this next generation of Star Wars films isn't for us old and sweaties to get upset with what's going on.
Yeah, to borrow a phrase from the Black Series Rebels.
Yep. But for us to be excited for the next generation of fans. And you yourself grew up on the prequels.
Yeah, I did.
And you could probably say that that's where you probably developed your first real fandom of the Star Wars, I would say. Imagine if me, being older, was just constantly telling you that you're wrong. For like, your Star Wars is wrong. You wouldn't. I mean, that happened, obviously.
Yeah.
But not. I don't feel to the extent of how it is.
It happened.
Last Jedi.
Yeah.
And
it happened when I was a teenager.
I would hate it if if a child enjoyed the movies, was told that the movies were bad and that they were wrong for liking the movies, and then didn't want to have anything to do with Star Wars because someone older than them told them that what they liked was wrong.
Yeah, there was something
that's the thing that sucks about what's going on in the fandom right now.
There was something that happened a little while ago. Me and roommate Mike went to go see a movie. We saw Ant-Man and the Wasp. And as we were going into the theater, there was a family coming out, and the dad was kind of talking about how, loudly talking about how the jokes in that movie all hit, whereas the jokes in the last Jedi were all terrible. And the dude like turned around and loudly was like, "Yeah, you know, it's just too bad that the Last Jedi sucked," at the top of his lungs. And it didn't bother me that he was saying that to us. It didn't even bother me that he was yelling it, you know, out in public. What really bothered me was thinking, is that getting in the way of his family's enjoyment of the movies? You know, like, are his kids not allowed to like them? Which is kind of what you were talking about.
Exactly.
You know, and that really bothered me. But, you know, it gives me a lot of hope when I listen to, you know, Tatooine Sons, and I talk to relatives and friends who have young children in their lives and how they're having positive Star Wars experiences. You mentioned on the last episode, your friend Catherine's nephew was walking around with a Boba Fett helmet, just loving life, you know?
And it wasn't like... It was one of the cheap rubies, two-piece Velcroed together helmets, and he didn't care.
Yeah.
It was a Boba Fett helmet, and he loves Boba Fett. So, I mean, he probably doesn't know any of the backstory behind Boba Fett other than what his cousin has told him and the handful of scenes he's been in a movie. Right.
But that's all he needs to like that character and love the world. So that to me, you know, shows that there are great people out there doing, you know, letting their kids love the thing that is the new Star Wars, even if their personal opinions of them are not the same. So we did some late night thinking there. Anything else to add?
It was late.
Before we wrap it up there?
No. I feel like if I started saying more things, it'd be things that were already said about 30 minutes ago and that I'd already forgotten.
I am almost certain I've repeated myself. I am almost certain I've repeated myself and you at least several times in this podcast. So, we'll see how that goes in the edit. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you very much for joining us today on another episode of Hoth Topics, a podcast about Star Wars. If you'd like to get in touch with us, ask us a question, leave us a comment about this or any other subjects we've talked about on the show, please feel free to do so. We would be super stoked to hear what you guys have to say about it, and maybe talk about it in a future episode on the air. So let us know what you think. You can find us at hothtopicspodcast.com. You'll find all of our episodes up on there, as well as any additional articles and opinion pieces and projects that we've been working on outside of just the general podcast.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll have actually posted the finishing parts of my Comic-Con costumes by now.
Well, by the time this one comes out, I certainly hope so.
Yeah, or I might have just given up entirely. Who knows? The future's weird.
Yeah, it's all wibbly wobbly.
Time travel.
Stuff. Ding. If you want to send us an email, please feel free to do so, sending us an email at hothpod@gmail.com. That's hothpod@gmail.com. And if you want to tweet at us on the tweeters, the tweeters, it's at hothpod. You can reach us there. I think that'll about wrap it up for tonight. Yes. I've been Ian.
I've having a hard time coming up with ways to deflect this question.
One day he'll say he is John. Thank you very much, everybody. We will see you next time.
And may the Force ever be in your favor. It's not stopping.
I know. I'm not fast enough.
Until I can think of another franchise to steal stuff from.
I'm sure that'll come.
Or Hunger Games in it.